Hi, my name is Matt Duhamel. Welcome to Solitary Nation, where we discuss America's criminal justice system. My guest today is Nancy Nordock Shelley. She is the coordinator for Justice for All and an affiliate from the Stop Mass Incarceration Network. Nancy, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Well, first of all, give us an idea of what the Justice for All is and what do you do there?
Okay. Justice for All was begun in 2013. I live in Florida, and we were undergoing at that time the Trayvon Martin trial, the tail end of that, and how it worked its way out. And at the same time, my youngest son had been arrested for a crime that occurred in 1991. He was extradited to California, and charges of murder were leveled against him. As it turns out, he was held. We had no idea what was going on with the whole thing, and I started doing research on it. I come from an academic background, so that's a comfortable place for me to be. And as I began to look around, I saw that something wasn't right about this. He had a public defender, and the public defender wasn't doing what I thought he should be doing. And I entertained the possibility of going back to law school. Because of my advanced age, I decided against that. I thought it was too rigorous for me, and I thought, what can I do that will have an impact and make this visible? I started Justice for All. I'm a member of the UU Church in Orange City, Florida.
It sounds like you're very active.
Indeed, yeah. And my son was, by the way, released from prison January 8th of this year.
Oh my goodness.
No charges against him. They had no witnesses. They had no weapon. They had no evidence. There was nothing. After 27 months, and he was held for the first 13 months in a segregated housing unit.
So you're saying to me, and that's great. That's awesome that your son is out. That's great news. So your son was arrested, incarcerated for 27 months?
27 months.
With no charges.
Oh, there were charges. The charge was murder.
Charges were filed, but no conviction.
No trial.
No trial. So he had an arraignment and all that.
Oh, yeah. Every 60 days, they take you down and they go, can we have a continuance? And you go, yeah, sure, whatever. And you wait for just the wheels of justice to turn, and it's a slow train wreck.
So now that he's out, what now? I mean, is there something that you could do about that process that he went through and you went through that seemed very, very unorthodox, or maybe it's more common than I realized?
It is more common than it used to be, and the reason for that is because there is federal money from the DOJ that states can apply for, and the state of California had 500 unsolved homicides on their books. They wanted to clear some of those charges, and so they got X amount of dollars, and that's how he got picked up. Was they didn't do, unfortunately, any investigation. There were no witnesses. There was no evidence. So he just sat in jail while the wheels turned. The thing of it is that the frequency of that happening, where this DOJ money fuels incarceration of people. I'm not sure if all states were as egregiously guilty of this as California was. As you know, they've got money problems and they've got overcrowding in prisons already. So you would think that they would not want to fill them more, but it certainly didn't seem so. And there was $500,000 at stake.
What's your son's name? First name's fine.
Jeff Campbell.
How's he doing?
He's doing great. He and I live together in Florida now.
Oh, that's great. Sunny Florida. Well, let's go over a few facts on and some statistics about the incarceration rate. About 2.2 million people are incarcerated, 1,700 in state prisons, 102. These numbers are put into these amount of prisons. 102 federal prisons, over 1,700 state prisons, 942 juvenile correctional facilities in the United States, and over 3,200 local jails. We're seeing a huge increase. In fact, my number, and correct me if I'm wrong, a 500% increase over the last 40 years. What would you have to say about that increase?
Well, that was part of my research. I wondered how that happened. And there's a wonderful book by a man named Radley Balko. It's
Hmm.
called The Rise of the Warrior Cop. And he is a newspaper writer, so he's fabulous at giving you dates and times and places. And I
Hmm.
put together a timeline, and I thought, how did this come to pass? And you look at the various things that happened in the 1970s when you had Nixon in office, and he was against the drug war, and that meant hippies and blacks were his target of choice. And so the drug laws were changed. And of course, marijuana and LSD were classified as class one drugs. And the sentencing for drugs went from something to, like 3 months or 6 months or a year
Hmm.
to life. There's a wonderful group with Carolyn Esparza, who's an LCSW out of the central part of the United States, that she does the Innocence Project. And every day they put up the names of the people who were post conviction let out of jail, either because of faulty investigations, uh, you know, perjury on the part of people who testified,
Hmm. Hmm.
or recanting of testimony that was given. And it's as I say, it dribbles out one and two at a time. So when you're working on 2.5 million, it doesn't seem very significant. By the way, the
Yeah.
largest single growth group in the incarcerated is in women.
Yes, and I have read about that. The increase of females incarcerated has skyrocketed. And do you have any theories on why?
It's my understanding that a larger number of women are involved in the drug trade.
Hmm.
The boyfriend gives you his stash to hold. You're the one that's sitting in the car seat. You've got the baggie in your purse. You go down for it too. Or people testify against one another, and you happen to be the fall guy because you don't know the system very well and don't know how to go around the various problems in it.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I mean, I think the drug policy started, back in the '80s with the tough on crime era.
Reagan,
Um, are
yes.
we seeing some changes for the better on that? I mean, I know that the incarceration rate has slowed down just a little bit over the last couple of years, but
It's not a significant amount. The DEA just last week was offered an opportunity to reclassify marijuana, and they've still got it as a class one drug. So that means that marijuana is graded along with heroin and other drugs that you can die of.
mm,
You're not. No one has ever died of a marijuana overdose, and so they've refused to do that.
I don't know when mandatory minimum started for a lot of different crimes, but it seems like that is keeping people in prison for long, very long, extended periods of time for crimes that just doesn't really match the crime. Do you
Yeah,
feel like the
you can
mandatory
steal a
minimums
pack
is
of gum.
what
You
was
can go
that?
You can steal a pack of gum and go to jail for life if you have two previous convictions.
How can someone out there like watching the show, get involved in these types of issues like mandatory minimums and things that you're doing?
Well, I think you have to sort of first you have to do what I call due diligence. You have to figure out what territory you're in,
Hmm.
what's really going on. And as you come across things that you find that you have a passion for or an interest in, if you're like FAM does wonderful things with sentencing projects, and FAM is a great organization. So I recommend you contact them and say, how can I help? When I started, I contacted you Justice of Florida, and I said, how can I help? And they knew I like to do research. So I took over looking at all of the legislation for California, Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Colorado. And I
Hmm.
tracked every bit of legislation that was coming out. And then I put together PowerPoints each month, and I mailed that out to everyone so that they could then contact their legislators.
I need to ask you a question that just popped in my head.
Hmm.
Before, was your son the first family member that
Yes,
was affected by prison? Okay, so
yes.
let's say before your son was arrested, prison, incarceration, arrest never really crossed your mind, right? I mean,
Well, it did from the point of view that I was a psych major in college, and I
okay.
ran in the 1970s. in California, I ran a 601 diversion program. I worked for Redlands Yucaipa Guidance Clinic, and I ran a program for teenagers who were truant, incorrigible, or runaways, or who'd been arrested for 1 ounce or less of pot or alcoholism. And so the thought at that time, that this was pre-Reagan California, and so it was the time when it was cheaper to be crazy than it was to be criminal. And so we wanted them diverted out of the system. And that worked quite well. And then you got Reagan in as governor, and of course he turned it around the other way and then took it national at some point later, where he was into punishing people and he was into criminalizing all those behaviors. And as we know, we have school resource officers in every school where discipline is now meted out by a police officer who has no training in developmental stages for children. He is just a cop. That's all he knows how to do. And so he handcuffs your kid when they're having autistic behavior problems. It's very inappropriate, and it criminalizes children, and you have the school to prison pipeline.
And that is an excellent topic for a future show on Solitary Nation.
Yes.
Thanks for reminding me on that, because that's something that I, from growing up, I'm 42, we never had that type of stuff, and now it's just gotten so criminalized. So going back, how did your perception change, from before your son was arrested to after? Because a lot of people out there, if they haven't been affected by incarceration by themselves, or they haven't had a family member or a friend go through it, they're like, I don't care what's going on, really. I mean, maybe, most people might think that. So how did your perception change?
Well, it certainly wasn't a front burner issue for me. I had worked in the interim. I worked for a while as a rape counselor, a domestic violence counselor. I worked recently, well, just before the issue with Jeff, I was working as a volunteer at the Harbor House doing injunctions for domestic violence, where I'd go and sit with folks and help them get the injunctions done. So it wasn't a front burner issue. And then, as I say, Trayvon Martin happened, and the Black Lives Matter movement came up. And as I began to look at the issues of people who were disabled, elderly, poor, black, name a condition in which you were marginalized, I began to realize they were low-hanging fruit for the justice system. And if we got a cold, they got pneumonia. You look at the number of people who are in prison, the rate at which black people are incarcerated is just really outrageous.
Yeah, I don't have those particular numbers right on me here, but the racial disparities, well, I do have this fact. People of color make up to 37% of the U.S. population, but 67% of the prison population. Did I say that right? U.S. population, 37%, 67% of the prison population. Another topic I want to discuss is, I've seen some recent articles about how prisons are turning into, and this was a title of a article written here, asylums. Prisons are the new asylums, with a high numbers of mentally ill people being incarcerated. Are you seeing that in your work and your research?
Oh, absolutely. And especially since I came from a sort of mental health background, in working in psychology and teaching psych, it was something that I was very aware of what the systems were at that time. Again, you can go back to Reagan and you can look at it. When I was in San Bernardino, Reagan was the governor, and on one day, he emptied out everyone who was not a danger to himself or others, gave them a bus pass, 30 days worth of meds, and the address of the SSI office, and said, go forth and flourish.
And flourish.
Yeah. And so then you started that three-cornered trip. You had them inside the hospital when they're psychotic, out on the streets homeless, and being arrested, or in jail waiting to go to one of the other three corners.
And the staff in jails and prison are not equipped to handle people that need medications, that need the right therapy, and you put them in a tiny cell, and it's just going to make matters worse a lot of times. I mean,
well, I think we need to bring back community clinics. We used to have them in the 1970s and up to the 80s, and that worked quite well. You had people either who were doing postgraduate work, who could do very low-priced treatment of people who couldn't afford things if you didn't have insurance. You had people who specialized in whether it was drug abuse treatment or whatever their particular issue was. You could go get treatment right now.
One thing I want to talk about briefly as we're getting close to wrapping up here in a few minutes, you're into the social psychology and the mental health. Let's talk about after prison. The community's perceptions of someone that's been in prison, an ex-felon, they're dangerous.
You can't rent an apartment in lots of places.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, you're precluded from getting the jobs. We have an action going on called Ban the Box, which means that potential employers can't ask you whether or not you have a history. Now, if you need to be bonded, that information obviously is going to come up if you're going to handle money, but even then you can get bonded. It is as if you are paying the price for the rest of your life. If you are, of course, a child molester, you're going to be on the sexual registry.
Mm-hmm.
It is a life sentence. There is no more mental health for ex-felons than there is for anyone else. It's like you drop off the end of the planet. And by the way, again, you've got a GPS monitor on maybe for some period of time. You've got the stigma of that. I know I asked my own son, I said, he's dating a woman, and I said, well, have you told her yet about where you've been for the last 27 months? And he says, oh yeah, he said, I don't want anyone to be fooled. I don't want anyone to be surprised. I don't want to hold on to a secret. I want them to know.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
not everybody takes that tack, but he's amazingly brave and courageous.
How is he doing? How are you guys doing, like, after that you've been through all of that? I know it must have been a huge roller coaster.
We would worry about one day at a time. We dealt with today, and we never thought about what could happen or what might happen or what did happen. It was just, what were we doing today? And I'm an avid journaler, and I stopped journaling for the 27 months, and I wrote to him every day, every single day that he was in prison.
I mean, if I went through what Jeff went through, I would be extremely, angry at the system, at least at the beginning. Is he that way at all?
Not at all. No, and we talk about this a lot. I'm very fortunate, and he's really verbal, and we know each other very well. I said, how do you keep from being angry? He said, you can't hang on to it. You have to let it go. You cannot focus on anything that happened. It just doesn't make it. It's gone. So he has learned how to let go of that. He said, what is it they say? Anger. When you're angry at someone, it's like eating poison and waiting for the other guy to die.
Sure. I mean,
work that way.
Remaining angry could be a prison sentence in itself. So.
Right.
Well, Nancy, I've learned a lot today. I appreciate you being on Solitary Nation. Okay, I appreciate it, and you gave us a lot of insight on the prison situation in the United States.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us. My name is Matt Duhamel with Solitary Nation. Join us next week for another episode.